Oof.
Okay, we have a quorum this evening, so I'd like to call the April meeting of the Board of Education, Weston, to order. And before we get started, I just want to give my sincere apologies for the delay this evening. We've had some technical problems, and my understanding is that we will not be able to do a live stream tonight. However, the meeting is being recorded. We do have the live stream going, okay, so that's great news. And the meeting is being recorded. So again, I'm very sorry for the delay, but let's get started. How about the Pledge of Allegiance? Would our student reps like to do that?
If you guys run, you can hear.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, let's start with the approval of the minutes. Can I have a motion for the meeting minutes from the March 24th, 2022 executive meeting?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the meeting minutes from March 24th Board of Education meeting.
Can I have a second? Okay, thank you, Bernie. Any comments? All in favor? Aye. Okay. Anyone opposed? Great. Motion passes. Thank you. Can I also have a motion for the meeting minutes from the March 14th regular meeting?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the March 14th, 2022 Board of Education regular meeting minutes.
Okay, thanks, David. Can I have a second? Thanks, Bernie. Any comments? All in favor? Aye. Okay, anyone opposed? All right, the motion passes. Thank you. Next up on the agenda is public comment. Do we have any comment on the public? When you come up, if you could just identify yourself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Travis Worrell, 44 Birch Hill Road. And I guess we get started. I would like to speak out about concerns with the focus on SEL in our schools, and the less focus on the intervention concerning our students' academic outcomes. Social emotional learning, SEL, has been billed as a transformational tool that will propel students to a greater academic achievement and personal fulfillment. Unfortunately, as recent studies have made clear, the research evidence to back up those claims is thin and unpersuasive. Moreover, the risks SEL poses to the student privacy and health are significant. Proponents of SEL call for focusing less on academic content and knowledge in schools and more on student attributes, mindsets, values, and behaviors. Not only are the goals of SEL ill-defined, but they are also raise significant unanswered questions about what attitudes should be promoted and by who. It is one thing to direct your own moral, ethical, and emotional development, that of your children, but having a government, vendor, or unqualified public school officials implement SEL curriculum based on coffee table psychology is quite another. Given the uncertainty around diagnosis and treatment of mental and emotional problems, even by highly trained physicians, the SEL movement runs the risk of further increasing the trend toward dangerous overdiagnosis and overmedication of our school children. I believe we should be focusing on genuine academic achievement through state and locally developed standards, assessments, and curricula, rather than classroom content of dubious academic value based on pop psychology. SEL was originally sold as training children to control their emotions, manage their time, and make good personal decisions. Teachers have always tried to instill these life skills. They're the same American values Benjamin Franklin proselytized in his autobiography 200 years ago. It is concerning that we are focusing on a program developed by the CDC, many may not know that, but that's who developed SEL, who has overstepped boundaries concerning the social and emotional well-being of Americans over the past 2 years. But recently, things are evolving concerning SEL. SEL purveyors, including the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, otherwise known as CASEL, have openly revised their goals. CASEL advocates transformative SEL to promote justice-oriented civic engagement, which can be translated to making your kids into activists. We send our kids to Weston schools to get what we perceive to be one of the best academic outcomes in the state. Recent statistics show that Weston is not living up to that mantra, and I believe we need to revert course and actively engage in ways to promote better academic outcomes to give our children the best possible outcome after finishing high school. There are a lot of distractions lately preventing Weston schools from achieving greatness. I am speaking about SEL now, but the other elephant in the room is the FOC promoting an approximate $100 million plus expenditure to build shiny new school buildings when they ignore the feasibility of investing in academics and maintaining the fixing of our current infrastructure and buildings, which are overly adequate to educate our student population in Weston. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment, and thank you for staying despite the delay. We appreciate that. Any other public comments? Great. You could just identify yourself.
I'm going to take my mask off so you can see my face. Good evening. I'm Janae Williams. I am a parent of a first grader here in Hurlbut, and I just wanted to say two things. One is that I was at the meeting that we had last month, and I'm still digesting what I witnessed. But I will continue coming to the meetings because it is very important to me that we keep our class sizes low. And it is very important to me that we have an answer to the question that I did not hear an answer to, even though it was asked twice. How do we make sure that our high performers continue progressing and are not languishing or backsliding to whatever the state standards are or our school standards are, and also to ensure that no child is being left behind and that we have adequate intervention and quick intervention for those who are not meeting standards. I was very alarmed about the comment about potentially having 4-year-old class sizes that met the school, or I guess the state law minimum of 18, but were, in my mind, much larger than I would ever send my child to. I heard the comment that was just made about the schools. I had the interesting experience of getting lost in this school at my last meeting, and I can tell you that I now am a strong proponent of revamping this school. I would not want to send my daughter here. And we have a lot of time, fortunately, because she's in first grade, but I felt that it was depressing. I felt that it dovetailed very nicely into the discussion we had about, do we need more school psychologists? I would imagine so. I found it very, just not the kind of educational environment I would want my child to attend. So I will continue coming to these meetings, or sending my husband or whoever, just to ensure that those things are met. They're very important to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Any other public comments? Okay, let's move on to the reports from our student reps.
Hi. So last meeting we spoke a lot about the upcoming Spirit Week, and so we just wanted to reflect on that a little bit to begin. It was a really great week. We had, as we mentioned, a ton of dress-ups, but something that I think really surprised us by the end of the week was actually we had Deck the Halls, we had some of those events that we brought back, and it was actually interesting. We had a lot of underclassmen engagement, which you don't usually see in these Spirit Weeks because they seem kind of daunting, and I think having the timeline, having this come towards the end of the year, our freshmen actually won Deck the Halls, which was really impressive to see them just putting their best work forward and still being really high energy, and I think it really engaged the student body. And along with that, the Ukraine drive was, we finished that, and we had over 350 pounds of donated supplies, and that was really, really impressive to see. And I think the community, that was one of our, I think, our biggest pushes as a school.
Yeah, I mean, that was just incredible to see that we had a huge turnout from the students bringing in supplies and things that people would need, necessities. And so, I mean, it was just awesome to see how much people cared in Weston, because I know a lot of students care, and a lot of families care in Weston, and it was just definitely a great initiative, I think. So yeah, I spoke on the phone with the assistant to the first selectwoman, and we are planning on, we're creating a plan right now with the juniors who brought the idea to the school, to work with the Weston Town Hall and perhaps the Westport Town Hall also to push forward the initiative. The only issue that we're trying to figure out is that it's really expensive to ship. I think they said it was almost $2 per pound to ship all the way to Ukraine. So we were working on creating some sort of plan for fundraising as well to push it forward. So I mean, if we were to bring it, or we are going to try to, so if we were to bring it to Weston and to Westport towns, we would need a lot of fundraising for that, especially if there's a big turnout because of the cost. But yeah, we're really excited going forward with that. Additionally, we have on May 1st, we have a big event that we usually do every year, but it was postponed last year because of COVID. The Star Walk with the Star Foundation, that was really fun a few years ago, and it's really great because we can get a lot of volunteers out. It's a huge event. It's like, I think, a 4-hour event on the weekend, and a bunch of people come out, and that is going to be something that's really fun. We're trying to get as many people as part of student government to participate, and yeah, I hope that a lot of people turn out.
And another thing that we have moving forward is we realized we were kind of looking at the calendar and we were like, we have a short amount of time for the seniors before we're sort of on internship. So we were discussing ways that we could still engage the students once the seniors have left, because I think that there is a great amount of time in between now and summer to sort of get the student body connected again, especially now that we're all together again in full capacity. So we are working with the junior student government to sort of prep them as an introduction into being executive members, having them plan some sort of spirit week once the seniors have left. And then also additionally working with the senior student government to sort of make the transition into internship special for the seniors, with Commitment Day coming up and prom and the events. Along with prom, our senior student government has been working really hard with their reps to plan it. And one initiative that I think is really important to highlight that they're doing this year is they've been working with Mr. Eganhead, who's the AP Environmental Science teacher. And they're actually, they got trees from Weston Garden to use as decorations at the prom that they're then going to donate to the school on behalf of the senior class as a sustainability project, which I think was really impressive of the senior class. So that was a great initiative that they started.
And we also have elections coming up very soon. The signs for elections are already out. And so the executive board, which is me, Carly, and Luke and Emily, we are meeting with the potential candidates for the exec board. We have some plans that we want to push forward for next year. Also, hopefully it's going to be a fully normal year, and that they get to do some of the things that we've always planned to do. Some ideas like talent shows and stuff like that can be very fun for a completely normal year. But yeah, we want to meet with them. We're going to meet with them and talk to them about how everything's run and make sure it's a smooth transition to next year. So it should be fun.
Great, thank you for that report. It's always nice to have you stay as long as you'd like. I know that there are some lacrosse games going on, or at least one still going on, I think. So please take your leave when you'd like to. Okay, we'll move on to the new business. The first is the consent agenda. Can I have a motion?
Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the items on the consent agenda as recommended.
Can I have a second? Thanks, Bernie. Does anyone have any comments on the consent agenda? Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? That motion passes. We have another personnel-related motion. Lisa, did you want to?
Yeah, if I can just add, this motion involves 5 teachers for whom the district does not have a position due to enrollment and internal shifting next year, the changing needs of the district. and they are listed attached. We certainly thank them for their service. This is part of our process. So if you can read the recommendation.
Move that the contract of employment of Kristen Hollinger, Trinity Klein, Charles Siegener, Carla Vope, Gentiana Jama not be renewed for the following year upon their expiration at the end of the 2021-2022 school year, and that the superintendent of schools is directed to advise such persons in writing of this action.
Okay, thank you, David. Can I have a second? Please, Bernie. Any comments? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Anyone opposed? Right, that motion passes as well. And then we have one more personnel-related motion.
Oh, yes, that has to do with the non-renewal of long-term certified substitutes. Those are the teachers who have served in a variety of capacities this year for different kinds of leaves. Some have been with us for many months, some of them have been with us for almost the entire year, and there are 4 of them.
Okay.
Can I ask a
Can we have a
question before the motion about how, so what does it mean if it's a long-term substitute and then the contract doesn't get renewed? Do they have other positions in the district? How, or are they just?
Some of them are, I'm looking at the list, and the name is going to be read. For example, Martha West Glynn, we were very fortunate, was able to return. She was a retired teacher, and you know that because of the situation with COVID, there have been certain allowances with retired teachers and people being able to come back and serve in this capacity. So I know that Ms. Glynn, who I've known for many years, is very eager to resume her retired life, and she came to serve in the role because we had a teacher on medical leave. So it's those kinds of situations.
I'm just curious, I'm reading the motion, it feels a little eerie.
Yeah, we do this every year. This is the way it works.
Okay.
Yeah, but I know. I hear you. Great. I don't think we had a motion yet on it. Okay, terrific. Somebody want to read the motion?
Move that the contract of employment of long-term certified substitute teachers Karen Hashgar, Lindsay Brown, Kyle Tolkien, and Martha West Glynn not be renewed for the following year upon their expiration at the end of the 2021-2022 school year, and that the superintendent of schools is directed to advise such persons in writing of this action.
Great, thanks, David. Can I have a second? Okay, thanks, Bernie.
Can I go back? Oh,
Yeah, any comments? Please.
no, not about that, but I do want to go back to the consent agenda.
Okay. Great. Let's just pass this motion first, and then we'll go back to the consent agenda. So, no further comments? All in favor? Great, me as well. Anyone opposed? Great. Motion passes, and we'll return to the consent agenda.
Yes, we went through it rather quickly, and I did want to come back and just take the opportunity. We have new hires, transfers, resignations, but I did want to take the opportunity to acknowledge the retirements. These are people that have served the district well. They will be sorely missed, and we certainly wish them a wonderful retirement. The first is Sheila Cooperman, who served for 26 years in the district. She was an English teacher, primarily in 6th grade at the middle school. Roberta Ray Cooper, who has been a para-educator at the intermediate school. She served in 11 years in the district in a variety of capacities. Andrea Russo, who is the administrative assistant at Weston Middle School. She's been with the district for 16 years. I remember first meeting her when she was my assistant when I was principal at Weston Middle School. She went on to work with you, Dr. Croft, and then she went to central office. Then she said, you know what, I want to keep going and have a 10-month position, and she's back at the middle school. She has decided now to retire and enjoy her beautiful grandchildren. And finally, the retirement of Joanne Tyborowski, our district data coordinator, who is retiring after 6.5 years in the district. And special shout out to Uber Salazar, who is our technology support person and is going to be moving into that new role. So we're very pleased to be able to promote him to that position.
Well, we wish everyone well and thank them for their service. And I know also as a part of the consent agenda, we have some exciting new hires that we welcome to the school district as well. So, thank you. All right, well, that is everything related to personnel. The next item on the agenda is the Weston Middle School and Weston High School Developmental Relationships Survey results. So I know we have the materials available to the public, but we'll have a presentation now as well. I think it's Dr. Kaplan, correct?
Yes, correct. And we still want to queue it up for everyone to pull up.
I think I'm just gonna move temporarily.
Yeah,
I feel like I'm
I would just add, it's really important to see all of the attachments that are posted. There were questions about, we have the questions, we have the results by school that are all available, and as well as the presentation. So there's a great deal of data that the public can certainly go through. Dr. Croft?
Thank you, Superintendent Wallach. So we appreciate the opportunity tonight to provide the board and the community an update, essentially our healthy learning environment and the work around that. So I'm going to ask in the initial part of the presentation that Mr. Matt Phillip, our assistant principal at the high school, Dan Doak, our middle school principal, join me for the first segment when we're going to talk about the developmental relationships survey, which also include information regarding alcohol and drugs. So we will first provide that information. Then we're going to transition to the second part of the presentation where the rest of the principals will be joining Lisa and me, and actually Tracy as well. So we've got a lot of people that will be contributing to this presentation on what are the next steps based on the information. What have we been doing in response? And I think that's going to be a very informative conversation because obviously a healthy learning environment is very important for students to achieve at high levels academically. So to begin with, and to reiterate what Lisa said, we have actually 5 documents that are posted for the community. 2 are the surveys that were given. These are the questions. The middle school and the high school, essentially the same questions. So you can refer to those. In addition, we have the disaggregated results by middle school and high school that's available for the community. And then a 5th report that really came out of the conversation we had at Curriculum Committee. These results were presented, sort of a preliminary snapshot at the February Curriculum Committee meeting. And we talked about, well, can we have some longitudinal view of this 2021 information that was obtained? The survey was given in November of 2021, but could we look back and see what the trends look like? And we were able, with the support of ADAP and Sonia Stack, to identify a consultant who was able to cull together the 2021 information with information from 2017 that included information from 2013 and 2008. So that report, that's the 5th report that you find here. And so the presentation you'll see tonight is, it contains what was presented to the Curriculum Committee. In addition, I know Matt and Dan have added some slides because the committee had asked, can we see some subgroup results related to the developmental relationships? We also have the additional slides that are pulled from the consultant's report for the longitudinal information. So that's really a snapshot. Then we'll get into the next steps, right? What does this mean? And then what have we been doing? Where are we going? So I will now turn it over to Mr. Matt Phillip.
Thank you. Hello. Is someone going to control the computer? Oh, you got it? Oh, look at that. Nice. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for letting me join you tonight. I'm going to start off the presentation by talking about the developmental relationships portion of the survey that we did, and then Dan is going to follow with some information on the drug and alcohol piece, as well as Ken to follow. So as you see up there on the screen, the survey was given in November to grades 7 through 12. It's a survey from the Search Institute in Minnesota. And in terms of the developmental relationships portion of the survey, there were 4 parts: developmental relationships with teachers, data on social emotional competencies, the experiences of school as a safe and just place, and academic motivation. The actual survey itself is available to you if you want to look at any of the specific questions, but this is more an overview of the breakdown that we received and some highlights from the survey. So the developmental relationships survey, has 5 elements, this portion. The 5 elements there are express care, challenge growth, provide support, share power, and expand possibilities. So the questions ask the students to answer questions based on how well teachers do each of these things. And each of the questions is specifically about, do your teachers do this? And so those are the 5 categories. And then the next slide shows how it broke out. So overall, in the developmental relationships portion, we had 21% of students reporting strong developmental relationships with teachers, 65% moderate, and 14% weak. In terms of the breakdown of those categories, you can see that challenge growth is where had the strongest levels, which is perhaps expected as we are a rigorous, challenging school district. The expand possibilities is where we got the greatest percentage of weak results. Those questions really are about sort of expanding possibilities outside of the classroom. So perhaps that's expected, that if students are talking about their classroom teachers, they may not get as much guidance on what they might be able to do outside of the classroom when they're in class. But those are some of the results there. So the next step is on social and emotional competencies. Again, there were 5 areas here. They are self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, and social awareness. So these are really, in a sense, students' self-reported results. So it's asking them to rate themselves on their competencies in these 5 areas. And overall, as you'll see on the graphic, youth reported strong levels of social and emotional competence. So anything above that red bar is in the strong category. And self-management and social awareness are particularly strong, whereas questions about relationship skills were a bit weaker, but still overall strong results from our students in this facet of the survey. The next piece was about school as a safe and just place. It's important to note that this was a relatively small module in the survey. There were only 4 questions on the survey that related to this piece of it. So overall, the students reported moderate experiences in this module, 27% reporting strong, 46% moderate, 27% weak. And then the final area that was looked at by the survey was about academic motivation, skills, and outcomes. There are 5 measures here: academic motivation, academic self-efficacy, growth mindset, internal locus of control, and goal orientation. And we can see that overall, 49% of our students were strong in the academic motivation, skills, and outcomes. 49% were moderate, and 2% were weak. And the category with the greatest number of strong results was the academic motivation piece. After that curriculum committee meeting, in February, there was a question about, disaggregating the data, looking at subgroups. And we did. We looked at the report we had allowed us to break it out by, differences between genders, racial groups, grade level, age, LGBTQ versus non-LGBTQ students. And we looked at all that, and there were some differences in certain areas between genders in certain places or racial groups in certain places. I would say, though, that Dan and I felt that the sort of most widespread areas where there were differences that were pretty notable were between either non-binary or LGBTQ students and other students. So this is, for example, the difference between, on the left, students identified as boy or girl, and on the right as non-binary, in terms of their social and emotional competencies. And you can see that the bars are a bit lower for our non-binary students, particularly in the areas of relationship skills, as low as 50 on that chart. The next one shows differences between students identifying as LGBTQ and those that did not, in terms of their academic motivation, skills, and outcomes. And you can see that results on the right side are notably weaker than on the left. And in particular, I noticed that on the right, on the sort of lower right, is where you have a significant increase in, I would say, the number of the percentage of weak results for the LGBTQ students under growth mindset, internal locus of control, and goal orientation, which is interesting. I mean, all three of those categories are kind of future looking and about students, how they perceive their ability to set goals for their future and control what's going to happen in their future. So it was interesting to see that there was a significantly greater percentage of our LGBTQ students that reported weaker results in those areas. So in conclusion, at a broad level, most students do experience good relationships with their teachers. Their social and emotional competence is generally strong. They reported moderate experiences of school as a safe and just place. They reported moderate to strong levels of academic motivation, skills, and outcomes. And finally, our LGBTQ and non-binary students reported lower scores in some areas of the survey. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Phillip. So I'm going to delve into the drug and alcohol portion of the survey briefly. And again, just a reminder that this is the survey that was given to students in grades 7 through 12.
Melissa, would it be worth asking questions now after that first section, or should we wait till everything's done and then ask questions? It's up to you guys.
Yeah, I think we can do it either way. How does the board feel? You have questions for this specific portion?
Section by section. Otherwise, it might get
Might get lost, yeah. How do you feel about that, Matt, Dan? Does that make sense?
Oh, boy. I think that's fine. I'll
I think a
do my
natural
best.
break
Sure.
would be, Dan's piece is very short, and then you have the drug and alcohol piece. I think having both of those together and then asking your questions, and then we have the second half of the presentation. So ask, I think the questions right after this piece would be perfect.
Okay, so I'll continue then. Okay, so there are 4 core measures for this part of the survey. You can see them up there. It's the actual past student use in the past 30 days of drugs or alcohol, the student's perception of parents' feelings about substance abuse, the student's perception of how their friends feel about substance abuse, and their students' perception of the risk associated with use of these substances. And we were also able to compare those areas with the 2017 survey. So the first slide here, this is our 7th and 8th graders from this year compared to 2017. And just some of the things that stand out clearly is alcohol is the most widely used substance at the middle school. Still 10%, but I think for 7th and 8th graders that is still a significant number. I also think it's interesting that that is an area where the perceived risk is the lowest, where the peer disapproval is also considered the lowest, and even the student's perception of their own parents' disapproval is the lowest. I think the next highest used substance for 2021 is down in the area of prescription drugs at 5%. And I'm noting that that's also a higher percentage than what you'll see on the next slide for high school. So that I think is worth paying attention to. I think it's also worth noting, and I think this is a trend that we're noticing, that students' perception of risk involved with marijuana is on the decline. I think also, the areas of vaping and even prescription drugs for middle school students is lower than what one would expect. Okay, this is the high school slide. As you might expect, there's even a greater use of alcohol and most substances, with the exception, I would say, of prescription drugs among our older students. One thing I didn't point out, though, on the other slide was what we did notice, and I think this is somewhat troubling to us, is we've seen an increase in use at the middle school from 2017 to 2021, whereas the high school, I think we're glad to see a decrease from 2017 to 2021 in virtually every area. So again, the perceived risk for high school students for marijuana has plummeted down to 51%. And again, that's an interesting trend to pay attention to. And finally, just the conclusions, and this is a broad overview, and we'll get more detail in Ken's slides that are pulled from the consultant's report, but you'll notice that alcohol is the most currently used substance among Weston students. There's greater levels of use overall of all substances at the middle school in 2021 as compared to 2017, and lower levels of alcohol and drug use reported at the high school. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doe. So moving on to more of a longitudinal picture, Dan gave a nice snapshot, I believe, of the 2020 results. I think right after this, because then that's the natural break between the two presentations. So, as Dan said, the data from the 2021 report was from the Search Institute's fall survey. And really appreciate Sonia Stack connecting us with Nina Chinana Consulting, who has had experience in working with districts to pull information together related to drug and alcohol. So we can take a look, and in some cases we can look over a 12-year period. But it's not a complete data set from 2008 to 2021. But we do have, I think, some valuable information here related to the 4 core measures. And obviously perceptions can feed into use, so they're very important. These are very standard measures that are used as part of surveys. And I think the real positive here when we look at things, and when you see this over time, is substance use rate trends are decreasing overall. Now, there are exceptions at the middle school that Dan's pointed out that are concerning, particularly with alcohol, with 1 out of every 10 7th and 8th graders having used in that 30-day period. That's a concerning number. When we look at this graphically, I've highlighted that. If you look, for the high school, those numbers over time are trending downward. However, with alcohol, we have an uptick there. With tobacco and marijuana use, that was pretty much non-existent in 2017, and it's ticked up there to 2% of students reported having used. And now that's about seven students, given the number of, I think about 330 students in 7th and 8th grade who took the survey, which is a really good number of kids responding. But that's something we are looking at. And we can share more related to curriculum as we go along. So the next core measure, perception of harm of substance use. So student perceptions of the various substances, alcohol, cigarettes, marijuana, prescription drugs, is an important area to look at over time. There's a similar chart to the one I just showed that's in the report. I did choose to pull this graph because I think visually it's very helpful. When you look at students' perception of harm, we're going in the right direction, right? I mean, there's greater perception that these substances are harmful. So students are reporting that, 79% of students, big jump over the previous year with vaping in 2017, it was 57%. That, in talking with Patty Powers, our curriculum instructional leader for health, relates directly back to curricular changes we made at that time to focus on vaping. So in part, I would say there's a curricular aspect that was focused on that. Prescription drugs, again, that's perceptions are greater. Tobacco, same thing. Marijuana use follows that same trend, but in relation to the others, the perceptions of students seeing that as a harmful substance are lower. And that follows national trends, probably follows where society has had conversations and they hear things in relation to marijuana. We do know that obviously brain science, middle school student brains, high school students are still developing, right? I mean, they're still growing. And so that is a number that we continue to need to work on. And then you see alcohol there as well. Parent perceptions are so critically important as well as we've seen, as we've gone into this information that over time, parental disapproval of use of substance remains high. It continues to remain high. And in some cases, the vaping kind of mirrors what we see with students' perceptions increasing. Very high for prescription drugs, tobacco, a little lower with marijuana, and with alcohol as well, a slight decrease, but still up there. But I added one other slide from the report that I thought was very telling. So just as a reminder, with the 30-day alcohol use grades 7 through 12, 21% of students 7 through 12 reported that they had used alcohol in that 30-day period. It's really stunning when you look at parent perceptions. When students perceive their parents to disapprove of the use of alcohol versus if parents are more permissive or maybe send a subtle message to little to no disapproval, there's 3 times greater of a probability here that the student is using alcohol, so 18 versus 52%. And then you see similar trends for marijuana and vaping use, so that parent messaging is important. And then peer disapproval, where I think it's positive that we have some high rates of peer disapproval around prescription drugs and tobacco. If we look visually here, we can see the peer disapproval, very, very high. We know that we made moves along with vaping and prescription drugs in the curriculum to focus on that. And so we think in part that jump to 90% with prescription drugs is a result of that. Tobacco remains high. Marijuana, the number 69%, while lower than the others, I think in comparison, in relation to, in talking to the consultant, that's still a strong number, but it needs work. Conclusions, so just to pull this all together and we'll get into questions. The longitudinal data shows that substance use rates overall are decreasing, but we have some upticks at the middle school that are concerning. Weston youth report the lowest perception of harm around marijuana use. Perception of parent disapproval continues to be high. Perception of parent disapproval is lower for marijuana in comparison to other substances. Youth who perceive their parents to believe it's wrong for youth to drink alcohol or use substances are less likely to use. I'm just pausing there. And that's a critical piece for the community at home. I know in our forums that's a message we continue to espouse. Now, the last two, polydrug use. Teens who reported using alcohol are more likely to report use of other substances as compared to peers who reported not drinking. So start using alcohol early on and move on to other substances. And then similarly to what Matt pointed out, this most significant subgroup difference, LGBTQ students reported substance use at a higher rate than their peers. So that is a group to look at and to support and see what our supports are in place in schools. So I thank you for your patience, and I was long and we welcome your questions.
Thanks, Ken, and everyone who was involved, I think, in working this out, this presentation. It probably would be useful for you to move your slides back to the beginning. And that way, if we have questions on each section, we can refer to them, because I can only hold so much in my head.
I know it's a lot. Okay. Where would you like to
Yeah,
start?
let's do this slide number, yeah, okay. So if you want to begin at the beginning, and, yeah, that's the very first slide.
First one.
Oh, yeah.
First one.
So if you don't have any questions on this slide, I'm just gonna go to my first question, we'll see where it lands. I really appreciated the cross-referencing, that we asked for in the curriculum meeting. That was very enlightening. Any cross-references around the LGBTQ and self-identified non-binary folks, kids, and the questions around safe and just place? Are there any results on that? I know that we saw a cross-reference between those communities and, support from their teachers, et cetera. I just wondered if there was any. That may not have been something that we dug up, but I think it's probably a critical question. If we don't need to answer tonight, we can come back to it.
I believe you said that there were only like 4 questions, Matt and Dan,
There are.
pertaining to that.
I did look at some of that in more detail, but again, it is the 4 questions. You want me to tell you what I learned?
Yes, please.
So in terms of the LGBTQ, at the middle school, the students reported only slightly weaker experiences.
Okay.
And at the high school, similar.
Only slightly weaker.
Yep.
As far as the safe and just place.
For
Well, that's really,
LGBTQ.
I'm asking for obvious
versus-
reasons, is
versus
it
non.
a supportive environment, are they
Yeah.
feeling,
I'm sorry to interrupt, can you clarify safe and just place?
Yes,
in this
I was just
survey?
going to add that
Thank
4
you.
questions are about emotional safety, they're not about physical safety.
I understand.
So I just want to clarify for everyone when we're talking about this topic of safe and just place, these 4 questions are really about how students feel motivated and do they feel respected and do they feel like they belong, as opposed to, do I feel physically safe in this place?
That was my
So that's
assumption.
an important piece of information here.
Yeah, no, that is what, your definition is what my assumption was as well, and I think that emotional safety is really what we want to do, and it's directly related to SEL in many respects, so that's a function of our work. Do you want to just move ahead and let's just see if, this was another question I had. I don't know whether it came up for any of you guys, but the red bar, can you just identify for me what the red bar means? So, I mean,
It's just the boundary between moderate and strong.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, it's the, now what is the sort of, is there a, no, and I don't mean a number, what's good and what's not good? Where, and the designers of this survey, do they have any opinions, and do we as a school have any opinions, as a district have any opinions on sort of what our limits are, or what our goals are, as far as where our bar is? I know these numbers, how do we feel about these numbers? I mean, Matt, how do you feel about these numbers? And when we look at, self-management, for example, is, beyond moderate and into strong, do we feel good about where they are in that strong box? Or do we wish that, obviously we all wish they were 100%. Did I say something ridiculous?
No, not at all. It's a very much a fair question. It's hard to judge.
It is hard.
Yeah, I think.
I was thinking more about the designers of the survey and whether there was, or whether do we compare this to other school districts? I don't think we can do that, but, it's just a question.
If I can just jump in, and please feel free, colleagues, to comment. I think we need to sort of look at this survey a little bit in context, as far as, one of the reasons we did this survey administration is because it is important to do surveys about, the climate in the school, especially connections, things like that. And we want to also thank ADAP, the Alcohol Drug Awareness Program, for supporting us and partnering with us on the survey. The survey took place in November. And in some ways, I look at this survey as sort of and I've been around for a lot of surveys, sort of let's see what, kind of to see how the students are feeling in November, finally coming back after being out of school, in school, isolated, all of that, with the craziness of COVID. Now this has been a year, I see it as transition and hopefully coming out into opportunity. So where do you feel, how do you fall now, kids, in November of 2021 when you took this? Now, we knew that kids have been struggling because of that. And so in some ways, would I personally like to see everybody in strong in certain characteristics stronger than moderate? Of course. I think that where they are now is, okay, this is where they are in November, and it will be interesting to see and important to have another sort of litmus test after we get back and we've been doing different things. I would love to see next year at this time where we stand with all the things we're pregnant. So I guess what I'm saying is it's a little bit hard to, I think, to say, well, we want to see these numbers. I think what I am at least pleased about is that we have some areas to work on, and that also there are indicators here that that kids are coming out the other end of this whole 2-year process. I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
I also think it's important to put the questions and the responses that students were able to choose in context here.
Exactly.
Because this chart was generated by the Search Institute based on our students' responses. It's an interpretation of the data, if you will. So the students' responses in this section of the survey, and you have it if you're looking at the supporting documents, the response choices, there are 4 of them, are a little like me, somewhat like me, mostly like me, and extremely like me. When I read that, I view extremely like me as the strong response, and I view a little like me as the weak response, right? It's the ones that are somewhat or mostly, somewhere in between, that are those moderate responses. And yes, we want to move those along. It really truly is the weak responses, the students who are saying, in response to a question of, I'm good at making friends, that's only a little like me, those are the students that we want to try and identify, right? So the context of the questions and the response choices to the students are in some ways much more important than the broader visual of the chart that the Search Institute
I
provided.
completely agree. I completely agree, and I appreciate this context, and I don't think this is like we're setting benchmark goals like our, like other areas where we would absolutely have to do that and want to do that. I think this is a whole picture. I was just curious about whether we're, on balance, feeling like this is pretty good for having come out of a COVID situation. We as you said, we have areas to work on, and are there anything? Is there anything that cries out pretty loudly? And I read your conclusions, so I can see them. I just wondered how you feel about this.
I also want to point out, and I think that Dan wants to say something if I'm reading the signal behind the mask. It talks about my teachers really listen to me. My teachers do this. And again, remember, they're taking this survey after coming off of being on Zoom with their teachers and hybrid, and it's as teachers. We have counselors, we have psychologists, we have social workers, we have other adults that build connections in different ways with our children that are not teachers. And it's just a nuance to point out, well, my teachers really listen to me. Okay, I also hope your counselor listens to you, and depending on the relationship with that. Dan?
Yeah, I was just going to add that when I first dove into this data with my staff, especially the team leaders, their initial reaction was, wow, it's not as bad as we feared.
Yeah, that's sort of where I was headed,
They had a sigh of relief because they were so concerned about how students fared during COVID when we weren't in school, when we were only virtual. Remember, when they took this, we were still in masks. So it was fairly new to being back this school year.
Yeah.
So
No, I appreciate that. I think I'm happy to move on and go to my last question. And Matt, thank you. I appreciate your sort of, I don't know how to answer this because it's not black and white, it's wishy-washy. But I just, since we're asking them for their emotional responses, I wanted yours as well. Yeah, on this one.
Yeah, just on that same topic, so you were talking a bit about how you analyzed, how the teachers felt about the data in November. Thinking about it now that we've come this far, do we feel like if we were to take the survey again, that the numbers would be very different from what we're seeing, or we have a general sense that what degree of improvement or change from like
that's a really good question. I think it's really difficult to answer because some of these questions were asking students about their experience since they've been in Weston public schools or Weston middle school. So it's hard to know how much they were thinking about their immediate past and how much they were thinking about some of their more distant past, and were the high school students also thinking about things that happened in the middle school. It's unclear, I think, going back to the wording of the questions. I know with the drug and alcohol piece, it was past 30-day use. It was very time limited, but it didn't seem to be so much for some of the other parts.
I would add that I agree. It is a tough question to answer. I think because so many of these questions are about mindset and dispositions, and those are difficult things to move in a short period of time. So, you know, maybe in certain areas, we might be able to measure some improvement over a 6-month period. But when we talk about dispositions and mindsets, I imagine that's a longer window to see some noticeable improvement.
And on some of those questions, we have ambiguity, or we're not really sure what kind of time frame we're looking at. If we were to resurvey again next year or the next time, do we have the ability to update, fix, adjust those questions so that they can better accurately capture what we're looking for now that we know what we're looking for?
Yes, we can. Not reshape the question, we can pick and choose the questions that we would like to give. Minor tweaks, maybe, but the questions are very standard, but you can pick various modules.
So the last time they had, I didn't mean to interrupt. I was just gonna follow up on that point. The last time they did a survey like this was 2017. So if we're interested to see, you know, how these results hold over time, are we looking at another 4 years before they're surveyed again, or are we gonna be following up on some of these issues more frequently?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and when we look at 2017, that was highly focused on the substance use. But I think that, you know, we can look at a shorter time frame. We're talking about developmental relationships with drug and alcohol. I mean, it's certainly, in fact, there are some requirements in terms of how often I think going forward, we need to survey our students. I'd have to check on that, but we should
We
probably
didn't have to do it more
frequently.
frequently. I think it can't hurt unless the kids are like, oh, this dumb survey again, why do I have to do this? And it does skew results if they're, you know, seeing too often, maybe, I don't know, that's not
Yeah,
mine.
I think that, you know, surveys are great, this data is important, but it's one data source.
Yeah.
And then we look at other sources, things like attendance, things like, you know, academic performance, things like, you know, how many students, for example, may be participating in our counseling groups, things like that.
Or disciplinary events.
There's other data that we can look at. I mean, I wouldn't just go by this. I think this is an important snapshot. There are some takeaways for us to think about, and sort of springboard off into those other areas and to keep looking at it. I mean, we have been trying to do this work all along, and we'll get into that with the next part of the presentation. And I do think that these serve as sort of, you know, we're dipsticking, almost like, okay, how are we doing?
Right,
You know?
right.
And then how are we doing in another year, because it's been a year now, knock on wood, that we will have been back full. I mean, we said when they came back, full, there were some disciplinary incidents and behavioral issues. And we're thinking, why are they behaving, you know, why are some of the students behaving this way? Because they hadn't been in school for 2 years and they hadn't transitioned, for example, to the high school or the middle school. So it's all of it is kind of interrelated, and we just have to, I think, be relentless in our expectation that we support all of our students and continuously have these conversations are so important.
This might be, my last question, this might be a question for Tracy. I'm not sure who could potentially answer this. But when we see the uptick in the middle school of higher use, substance use, does that necessarily translate into higher future use in the high school in 3 to 4 years? In other words, you know, we've seen a decrease in the high school and an increase in the middle school. Can we pretty much predict that that means we're gonna see an uptick in the high school in 3 to 4 years when all these middle schools, you know? And if so, what are the interventions that we put in place to make sure that that doesn't happen? And it's not all on us as a school district, but it's something to think about.
So again, I think that's a tough question, and we can't read our crystal ball. We don't know what will happen in the future. I
I do think we're seeing patterns in those increases that are related very directly to mental health concerns and struggles, and it's sort of a chicken or egg discussion, which comes first. We're keeping a really close eye on those increases, especially because we're often seeing them paired with significant mental health concerns, whether it's anxiety, depression, those are probably the most common that we're seeing at this point. And of course, the goal is if we provide and work in conjunction with families, appropriate social emotional support, will we help to promote a reduction in those numbers over time? But we'd like to see that. But I think we're all nervous about those higher numbers. They're really young students. We're talking about 7th and 8th graders. And again, those concerns are often not happening in isolation. They're happening paired with other concerns that have a direct impact on students functioning in life and in school as students. So I think that the best I can tell you is that those are students who are being prioritized for the interventions we can provide in the social emotional realm, and a lot of communication and collaboration with families and outside providers whenever that's appropriate.
It does have implications for our health curriculum. So if we're seeing this uptick with 7th and 8th graders, Patty Powers and I, the CIL for health, we looked at our 6th grade curriculum, and we're now in year 5, out from the last renewal. And just looking at our 6th grade curriculum, we have, heavy emphasis on puberty, stress, nutrition. There's drug and alcohol education mandated K-12, so we have that infused. But in terms of the levels that we have, it prompts us to look at 6th grade. But also, since we're seeing these results with 7th and 8th graders, it prompts us to look 7 through 9 and how do we enhance our efforts there. Now, obviously, there are other concerns that could be related to this, but we do have, that's another piece that's under our control. And good time as we're thinking about health and school counseling renewals in the coming year, just to have this information as part of the backdrop.
And no better time to reinforce social emotional learning at all levels in order to just, it's not soft skills, it's critical skills right now in light of the sort of things we're seeing. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about, and we'll talk in more detail about social emotional competencies and skills in the second presentation, but just look at the skills listed here: self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, building relationships. Those are skills that make or break your success basically at every juncture in life. You can be brilliant academically, but if you can't cope, or if you don't have the ability to build relationships with the people around you, your impact is going to be limited. So yeah, I would argue that all of those skills are critical, and again, we'll talk in more detail about others that are related to this as well.
Did you have questions? I have questions, David.
I do as well.
Okay, go ahead.
I have kind of more of like my first overall question is, of the underrepresented groups, why was LGBTQ and non-binary the chosen underrepresented group to solicit individual feedback from?
What do you mean by the chosen
Like, in
group?
other words,
We were able to break it down by race,
Yeah, there was all.
LGBTQ, boy, girl, non-binary, grade level, all of those were.
but the first set of questions, which I think were the demographics, asked specifically about gender. But unless I missed it, there wasn't demographics about race, religion, socioeconomic status.
I'm looking.
I think one of the reasons was we didn't see huge disparities among some of the other cohorts. And in addition, I forget what the exact number was, but what was the in order to report out on a subgroup, we had to have
At least
I don't
30.
remember, it was 40 or 30?
30.
So some of the groups we didn't have enough of in a given level. But my recollection as we analyzed the data, frequently, there weren't huge disparities in most of the groups.
But you analyzed, you disaggregated and you analyzed
Yes.
based on all those
Yes.
differentiating characteristics.
Oh, yes, yes.
The biggest differential was in the LGBTQ or the gender non-binary, that's where you highlighted
Yes,
that.
we looked at, I looked at 7th grade boys, 7th grade girls, white, non-white, 8th grade, and we also looked at the LGBTQ non-binary.
Okay, so I mean, I think the basis of my question is more, and I may have missed it or just may not be here. I look at the LGBTQ as an underrepresented group. And there's so many things that fall under the umbrella of an underrepresented group. It could be a single parent home environment. And these are the things that when I look at, and the reason I ask this question is because when we're collecting data, there should be a reason that we're collecting the data. It's to either validate that what we're doing is working really well or find areas that we can do better. And so going with the presumption that the intent here was to validate what we're doing well and know that we're not perfect, we can do better in some areas. And then I parlay that into the academic outcomes that we're struggling with as a district. I just sort of wonder why we don't break down this information more into how is this potentially affecting the academic outcome of our kids. Like for example, we may have children that are in home they're struggling within their home environment. We didn't, from a parent's perspective, we didn't seem to get any of that information out of the survey. Like for example, I'm in a single parent home, or I'm living with a grandparent. I don't know what the exact set of questions would be, but questions that would be better to correlate with some of the academic outcomes. And with the one slide that got pulled out, which was about non-binary and LGBTQ, do we know if the, I made note of it, I forget which slide it was. I'm not sure which slide it was, but when, the non-binary and LGBTQ, they had some lower results than the rest of the respondents. How do we know how to attribute those results? How do we know if it's simply that those students don't consider academics as important, or if they're truly struggling, or if they look at, this is what I see as a bigger problem in the course of my day, or as I navigate the curriculum. How do we know what the reason is that the LGBTQ and the non-binary kids are responding with not as strong results?
There was a number of questions there.
Yeah, I know.
I think the basic answer, I'm just gonna be very honest, I think the basic answer is that we don't. We don't know what the specific reason is for each particular student in terms of regardless of what group they belong to. We don't know the background, it's an anonymous survey, we don't know who these students are or why they responded this way. But we try to look at trends, we try to look at overall broad strokes. And I think the reason why this particular slide is highlighted is because this is a group, and you can see it there, where there were 44 respondents in that non-binary group. That's a significant number of students who took this survey, right? And so for their results in all of these areas to be so significantly lower than the results that you see on the left, that's a red flag for us. Are we speculating about why those results are what they are? Yes, but it would be speculation, right? Without going specifically to certain students and asking them why, and again, this is an anonymous survey. So that's really our work, is to try to understand why are students in certain groups experiencing things at school in this way, and how can we address that? And that's difficult work, because we don't really know those answers without getting down into the nitty-gritty specifics.
Yeah, I think that's the basis of my question, is to try to understand the why, because it might not be anything that the district is doing poorly or could be doing better. It could simply be what motivates this group or this cohort, and what doesn't motivate them. What do they perceive as important, or what do they perceive as a struggle? And it's sort of, my next question.
Although they've declared what is a struggle and what isn't a struggle in the survey. This is a little bit like me, this is a lot like me, right? So they, as part of this group, have said, more often than not, I'm struggling with these things.
Right, my point
We're not guessing if they're struggling.
My point though is that when we have declining academic outcomes in certain areas, I want to make sure that we're not shifting our attention to places that we don't have any ability to change the outcome. And that's why I'm asking if there was a way to figure out these students who are identifying as non-binary, if there's something that we as a district could be doing better so that they more closely mirror the children that do identify, or is it something external to the district in which we cannot do anything, and it's not something that we can change?
But I think the correlation, and correct me if I'm wrong, the correlation between this and academic outcomes is not the identity of the student, but rather their ability to be self-aware, their ability to self-manage, their ability to make responsible decisions. Those numbers correlate with good academic outcomes. That's what we're trying to match up. And if we see that a particular group is less able to make those good decisions, is less socially aware, is less able to manage themselves, then we can attribute that to lower academic outcomes.
I agree that you can attribute it to lower academic outcomes, but the why, I'm trying to go to the root of the why, and if we understood the root, then we could be in a better position to provide support.
I think that's the point of the survey data, right? So there's a difference between the quantitative data and the qualitative. We're doing the quantitative data to identify what areas we need to do further investigation and research to get to the whys. Because you're never going to get the whys out of a quantitative, a number-based thing. So we're kind of looking at our numbers to decide where to put the effort going forward to identify if there's an issue with this group, and if there is, how to best support them.
That's right, Bernie, and we do have another presentation on next steps, so David, you may find some answers.
And two quick follow-ups then, which is, I think, the question Taffy asked, and it might have been of, I think it was of Ken. At what grade level do we introduce drug and alcohol awareness and trying to teach the kids that these are potentially dangerous? I know it's asking, maybe you start asking Melissa, but at what grade level do we start to try to educate our kids on the dangers?
Well, drug and alcohol education is K-12, but it's very different at the K-2 level. It's about, a decision that may not be a good decision at that level versus talking about substances. What I can do is, it is state mandated, but it's always developmentally appropriate with the grade level. So it's 4th into 5th grade where we start to get more into that piece, which I can, we have a scope and sequence, we can share that with the board, with the curriculum committee, which will outline it further.
Okay, because what I'm thinking is that, again, we're up against headwinds, which is that marijuana is being legalized across the 50 states, right? And so I think it's as a parent and as educators and as a board, it's how do you try and get kids to understand that it's dangerous, you shouldn't try it, but all around you, dispensaries are opening up, it's becoming legalized, there's ads on TV about how to properly use it, and I'm curious if the education is being, being changed or being revisited, because the environment has changed, right? When I was in high school, if someone smoked pot, they were the one person out, and you could be sure that they were going to be disciplinary actions, and it was it isn't big to do, but today it's relatively accepted, even if it's not legalized yet, it's becoming acceptable. So from an education perspective, it's no longer don't do it, it's illegal, and just trust me, because it's illegal, you shouldn't do it. So are we looking at programs that are more geared towards what we're going to be, we're entering now, the phase of marijuana is being legalized, but we're telling kids it's dangerous. So again, mixed messages. So it's legal, but it's dangerous. I don't get it. So
Like, you're asking me, are we going to modify it so that we're going to say it's actually legal when you're 21, and it's not dangerous when you're 21 if you know how to use it properly?
well, I think that's
Which is the message of alcohol, even though alcohol's dangerous.
Look, when I discussed this with Patty Powers, our curriculum leader for health, it's really important for students to understand the brain science and how marijuana use affects their brain growth. And that's the key message. And when we go back to curriculum, like when we did for vaping or for prescription drugs, that's the kind of re-messaging when we think of our curriculum and why we need to revisit when things change in society, we have to change our approach. And so that's the conversation that's happening now because the context is changing.
That's just how to correlate the increased usage is that it just doesn't seem, if I were a middle schooler, it doesn't seem so bad. Everyone, it's on TV, people are legalizing it, so I'm curious how, from an education perspective, we're changing it so that we're trying to educate the kids that it may be legal, but it's not good for the body.
Right, and again, I think it's coming back more to that brain science.
And then do you think that is an entry, I think you mentioned in one of the slides, almost like a proxy or a gateway, that kids might be using other types of drugs more now because the perception of alcohol and marijuana is more accepted. So is that a concern?
Well, look, the longer you can delay the use of any substance, the better, right? Because we know, use of marijuana can lead down the road to other substances as well. And so I think from the parent messaging, that's delay. And so parents, community, and in the school and the curriculum, we're working in concert. I think that's really important. But that's what this information is rich for our, from drug and alcohol standpoint, for our health teachers, our counselors, and for us as a district and educating the community.
Yeah, I think next steps are the important part, which we'll see shortly. Can I ask some questions? I didn't know if you were. Okay. I just had two comments and then one brief question. First, I think, based on some of the comments of my fellow board members, that I think, I'm hoping to see in the second presentation or in the next steps going forward, that we kind of look into a little bit about, what we consider good and how that relates to the word moderate, because I think in some situations in this survey, moderate is a good answer. I think in others, moderate probably doesn't reach the standards in Weston. When I see that only 21% of our students said that the relationships with their teachers were strong, many may have said moderate, but in that context, I wouldn't say that moderate is good enough. So I think, that would be something I would like to see us dig into a little bit more. I think the same with respect to expanding possibilities outside of the classroom. And some of the questions related to stress. I think we all know our students are under a lot of stress, and moderate may not be acceptable to us. So, those are some things I'd like to follow up on in the coming months. I also think, regarding the drug and alcohol survey, I had a concern about, and I don't know if anyone else on the board did as well, but a concern about the structure of the survey, using the use in the past 30 days kind of rubric. In the future, when we consider a survey like this, I would like to see more questions regarding intent to use, addicts. These really aren't overdoses. These are poisoning, essentially, right? I mean, we've got kids that are dying over, one single bad decision. So, I think in a very important topic like this, we want to really understand and educate and learn how to help kids, kind of what you're talking about, Ken, with this decision-making process, because I think it's a very different dynamic to think about, consistent abuse of alcohol and marijuana. Yes, we should be concerned about that, and we have been historically, and we are, and we're looking at this data, but what I'm not seeing is, are kids educated about what can happen from one single baking pen that they're not familiar with where it came from, or one tablet of oxycodone that they don't know where it came from. So I think I'd like to know how our students think about that type of use. And then my last point is just a question, which, the survey came out in November, and we're analyzing it now in April. I'm just wondering if we can speak a little bit about the delay, and if we feel like we've lost the opportunity to respond to some of these results.
If I can,
Yeah.
at least someone else can jump in. The survey was given in November. That doesn't mean that nothing was done from now until, okay, we have to present to the board. The presentation was actually postponed because of some of the meetings that we had with regards to academic goals. We had a great deal of the information prior. However, we felt that it deserved, if you will, this amount of time at a board meeting. I don't think that we have lost any opportunities, because internally we had meetings and shared these results and discussed these results, and what we should continue to do to help our students and support our students. Again, this has been really a transition year, I would say, and so any delay really came from that. I think it was, we have the results, correct, gentlemen? I remember meeting in December and talking about this, and we're doing it and everything else. So, I take responsibility that it was delayed until now in April. But April, yeah. I certainly don't want anyone to think that doesn't mean that we haven't been processing, digesting, discussing, and trying to work for programs in the spring that I'll be talking to that speaks to some of this. But, it's very important data and goals that have been part of our action plan.
Okay. Thank you.
I can just add that we have been, consistently providing ongoing intervention to individual students throughout this school year. And we've talked about the work of our counselors, the work of our psychologists, the work of our social workers. So much of that is connected to this, and I think this has been the most active year for that part of our department probably ever in this district. So know that students are being monitored, there is communication with families, and all of that is happening in conjunction with this information.
Okay, should we move on to the second part of the presentation?
So I know that this is always the question, you know, you do a survey or you have data and you say, well, then what next? What are the next steps? What have we been doing along the way? And what is the next level of work that we have to have? And I'd like to draw your attention to the two, back please, the two icons at the bottom. They were developed by Carla Volpe at the high school in relationship to our portrait of a graduate. Next slide, please. And the portrait of a graduate, as we know, and they've been doing incredible work at the high school, is, you know, what do we aspire to have our graduates be able to demonstrate when they leave? It is a K-12 journey, and specifically when you look at the goals of the district around social emotional learning and the idea of inclusive climate, honoring the uniqueness of every individual. Basically, it's talking about, you know, when you leave the Weston Public Schools, can you care for yourself, and do you value the ability to care for others? Because as Ms. Edwards was speaking at, when you look at things about relationship skills, social awareness, working together on teams, all of that, these are lifelong skills that you got to be able to do to be a successful contributing member of society. So specifically, we're going to focus on those two areas. Next slide, please. Okay, there was a question, and rightfully so, you know, exactly what is SEL, or what is SEL here, perhaps, in this district? And we talked about, you know, it just seems like an umbrella that's encompassing all of these things. So I'm going to attempt to kind of define it a little bit more. This is the definition from Castle. What it does talk about is, can children and adults acquire and apply knowledge, attitudes, and skills necessary? And it talks about, you know, do you understand, can you manage your emotions? And I would add, why? And ultimately be able to achieve your personal goals. Because when you do look at those competencies that are defined in the survey, things like self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, all of those things, you know, as we teach math, science, social studies, all those other things, are we interweaving skills about collaboration and about self-awareness and how to, you know, organize oneself to be able to balance both the academics, the co-curriculars, and everything else. You know, it's hard work. It's hard work, and we would be remiss, I think, if we did not work towards providing our students with opportunities to develop those skills. Next slide, please. So these were the two goals that actually were in our district action plan. And I look at it simply as, like, the first goal really talks to, again, caring about others. So, you know, we want to promote an inclusive climate, and that specific language is actually taken from the Board of Education's beliefs, where it talks about, and it is all of these different groups of people, independent of, you know, race, religion, sexual orientation, perceived differences. Are we a welcoming community? Because we know that when children feel comfortable and welcome, that then they will thrive. And so I guess in relating it back to the survey, if we say, well, gee, we're seeing something a little bit off with this particular group, what to make our students feel, you know, honored and for their uniqueness. So that's one goal. And then the other goal is much more specific, where it talks about providing targeted social emotional learning support, K-12. And when I look at social emotional learning support, K-12, I'm terribly sorry. I forgot that she's on an emergency room. It's fine. When we look at targeted social emotional learning support, K-12, I think it's really important to understand when you talk about social emotional learning. What we are not talking is about teachers being therapists in a classroom. We are talking about how teachers, counselors, people in specific roles can work with children to develop those competencies so that, yeah, they can understand and self-regulate. Next slide, please. So here we have some examples, and I'm going to ask the principals and central office staff to chime in here. We talk about providing targeted social emotional learning support, K-12. And it looks very different in different settings, but again, at scale, across K-12, we want to ensure that students have an understanding, that everyone has an understanding of, how to be self-aware and how to self-manage. So I'd like to turn it over to my colleagues, if they can comment with some specific examples of what does this actually look like here in Hurlbut, in the middle school, in the intermediate school, at the high school. What does it look like? Take it away, principals.
I'll begin with Ruler at Hurlbut and the intermediate school. Ruler refers to the resources and program that we use from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. It's a systemic approach to social emotional learning, and Ruler is an acronym for 5 skills of emotional intelligence. Recognize, understand, label, express, and regulate your emotions. There are 4 core anchor tools that we introduced at Hurlbut that are then built on at the intermediate school. The most commonly known one is the mood meter. And an example I wanted to share is how we actually use that to support our academics. So when students learn to understand their emotions, they have a visual tool called the mood meter. And then we use that to help students understand characters' feelings in text, and it helps develop a deeper understanding and comprehension and literacy of the text that they're reading. So that's one of the links to the academics as well. And Addie will share how they build on that beginning work at the intermediate school.
So we build on what Hurlbut has done with the mood meter, and we really take it to that next level because we really tell our students that all emotions are valid. But there are certain emotions that are better for working in school, where you're able to concentrate, to be able to focus, to be able to make better decisions. And that's on the right-hand side of the quadrant. We like, so the red and the green was more focused and pleasant. Energy is there. And so in our ages, we're really, as we begin to recognize their emotions, we use a tool called a meta moment, which is where they're starting to sense some anxiety or some anger or whatever, and then they learn strategies to move them to a better quadrant. So through learning to breathe or to take a walk, we have sensory stations throughout school where there's they can go through the hallway and there's where they can do a little trace, they can do some wall push-ups, they can do some little frog leaps, or they can go into a little area in their classroom where it's a little quieter area. They can be creative and do some drawing, just to sort of shift that emotion and get it to a better place where they can be learning. The other area too that we use our school counselors a lot. Also, they're supporting the classroom teachers with Ruler, but they also are working on specific sort of developmentally appropriate topics. So they're going in and they're doing guidance lessons, and that could be on friendships, especially with our little ones. It could be on teasing and tattling. As we get to the 5th graders and they're starting to move into getting ready to middle school, they talk about good choices and knowing your best self. So those are things that we're building on Ruler in our school.
Okay, and then I'd like to just talk a little bit at the middle school, how we start with the DBT skills at scale, because we do have counselors, social worker, school psychologists who will use DBT skills in counseling sessions or with groups. But what I'm talking about is how we get it at scale for all of our students. So each of our grade level counselors meets with students in their health class and actually co-teaches with the health teacher and teaches them some of these skills and strategies. For example, they may be talking about the topic of distress tolerance, which is important as students learn how to regulate their emotions. And they'll learn different mindfulness strategies, or they'll learn things like making a decision in the moment, or how to sit with an emotion. These are all the strategies that will help students, and as they develop more of these skills, we believe that they will serve as a protective factor and help them make the right decision when it comes to things we were talking about earlier with drug and alcohol. We want to make sure that students have the skills to deal with anxiety, to deal with different stressors, and not be tempted to self-medicate.
I just want to back up a little bit and maybe provide some context for dialectical behavioral therapy. So what we're doing in school, primarily in classrooms, is not therapy. It is a curriculum that is based on the 4 basic skills of DBT, which is an approach to helping people develop skills in 4 basic areas, and Dan just mentioned them. They are mindfulness, distress tolerance, emotion regulation, so tying right back to this ruler curriculum, and interpersonal effectiveness. And you can see the connections too back to that developmental relationship survey. Those are exactly those social emotional competencies that we looked at. So students in their 9th and 10th grade health classes are actually engaged in curriculum learning about these particular skills and strategies for accessing and strengthening these skills on a day-to-day basis. It's not a therapy program in those classrooms. It's really truly learning about social emotional skills. There is DBT therapy or counseling that is happening with our trained school social workers and for students that need that level of intervention. But in terms of what all students are receiving, it is truly a curriculum. It's called Steps A. And all of our health teachers, many of our administrators, and all of our counseling staff have been trained in the delivery of this curriculum. And I would also add that our health teachers, under the direction of Patty Powers, have worked very hard to adapt that curriculum to Weston and to our students. So we do have a book and we have a lot of resources that we use, and we could literally read a script for each lesson, but they don't do that. We've really adapted those things very well to the needs of our students and really to the interdisciplinary connections that they can find within our other curricular areas. So one of the things that I just want to call attention to from within that curriculum, and again it ties back to this ruler piece, is the notion of the wise mind. Students talk early in 9th grade about the wise mind and how that is sort of a middle ground between your emotion mind and your rational mind. So how do you take all of the information in? How do you react to it? How do you notice you're reacting to it? And then how do you shape your decision making, or how do you shape your reaction in the wisest way, using your wise mind, using some sort of middle ground, middle path, as Dan said. Again, this notion of dialectics, that 2 things can be true at once and you can make a choice about how you move forward. So again, just wanted to underscore that notion that this is truly an instructional curriculum about skills that everyone can access in all kinds of situations.
One of the very targeted areas that we do have that provides social emotional learning support that's been very successful is alternative pathways. If we could just speak to that a little bit, please.
Sure, I can start, and Tracy, maybe you want to add in. So Alternative Pathways is a new program at the high school this year. It was built out of a need for students who have significant challenges in the realm of emotion regulation, students who experience a great deal of anxiety and depression at school, or even students who really struggle with behavioral concerns. It is a very small program. It is intended as a significant intervention for students who struggle to access their learning. It has been crafted in such a way that we can provide as much flexibility as possible for these students, because we know and we have learned over time that students need to be ready to learn. They need to be in an appropriate mindset. They need to feel comfortable in an environment that they're in, and they have to be able to access their education. Sometimes students of this nature are not able to do that on as routine a basis as we would expect in a typical school environment. So our flexibility around where they are is key, and that is the one thing that we have been able to provide overwhelmingly with this program, is flexibility both in terms of the emotional support that we can provide, the counseling services, which include both individual and group counseling, as well as academic services. So these students are in classrooms with very small environments with teachers who are tailoring curriculum to their individual readiness and their needs. Again, as I said, it's a new program this year, and we are continuing to shape and modify what that program looks like. But we've seen tremendous gains academically and socially and emotionally for all of the students who have been a part of this program this year.
Yeah, I think that was a great summary. I'll just add two quick things. You spoke, Julie, about the small and flexible classes. One of the other benefits of that alternative pathways program, though, is that it's housed at the high school. And so when students are ready to be in one class or more than one class, a general education class, they have the opportunity to do that versus students who maybe historically needed this level of support would be provided with instruction in an out-of-district placement, and in that moment you have no opportunity to be participating in maybe an advanced math class because that's an area of interest and great strength. Julie and Dan also did a nice job describing DBT. That is absolutely the basis for the alternative pathways program. The group counseling is centered very specifically on those skills, as is the individual counseling that's provided to students within that program. And we're very fortunate that the social worker who leads that program has very extensive training in DBT. So I can segue at this point to the next item, which is all about our consultation with Dr. Kaplan, who is an MD psychiatrist who is affiliated with Yale University. And he has provided support in a number of ways this school year. The first listed here is the parent presentation. So on February 23rd, we hosted what we refer to as a community conversation about mental health. It was geared very specifically to the middle school and high school, largely because of the patterns that we're seeing, not to minimize the patterns that we're seeing at the elementary level, but they are definitely magnified at the upper grades. I think we had good attendance in that program. We'd always love to have even more parents participate and join those conversations. There is a recording of that presentation available on our website. One of the benefits for the people who attended live, we did not record the question and answer for obvious reasons. We wanted people to feel comfortable asking questions and knowing that that wouldn't necessarily be public information. Julie, Dan, and Meredith, one of our high school guidance counselors, served on the panel for those questions, and I think that was well received. Dr. Kaplan really spoke to the complexity of being a teenager and how much that is magnified in this time of COVID. And he talked a lot about brain development and changes that are happening. This is a really critical time for students, and what it means when the world around you looks very different, when people are under more stress, people are wearing masks, social opportunities are reduced, and how do we help students navigate kind of the immediate aftermath of that, and then what will probably be our new normal. In addition to the parent presentation, Dr. Kaplan also led staff professional development on March 21st PD Day. He spent 2 hours with the entire HES and with staff together. That was one presentation. He met with the middle school staff. That was a separate presentation. And then with the high school staff. We specifically grouped those presentations just because of the patterns and themes that we're seeing at each grade level. The title of the presentation is, or was, Where We Are with COVID, Understanding How It Impacts Our Students and How to Help Them. Again, very much focused on what we've been through, where we are now, and what it means for moving forward. I do want to highlight, it's not on this slide, but we've talked about it previously. Dr. Kaplan is also consulting with our mental health teams on a monthly basis. He meets again with counselors and psychologists for HES and WIS together on a monthly basis. He has a separate meeting with the mental health team at the middle school, which includes social worker, psychologists, and counselors. And he's done some more extensive work at the high school with counselors, social workers, psychologists, and also the alternative pathways program. I also have the next item, which is DBT training for new staff. I think we've talked at length about DBT We have certainly prioritized having new PPS staff trained at the middle school and high school. We've had a number of new staff in PPS. I think you're all aware. This is something that we will continue to do as we onboard new psychologists, social workers, and counselors moving forward. We want them to have this framework. It is a critical part of our instruction and also, of course, our individual and group counseling at both the middle school and high school.
So, very recently, we administered the SAT in a digital format for the first time to all juniors at Weston High School. And overall, that went over very well. But while that was going on, we had the opportunity to offer a variety of programming related to social emotional learning to our students in 9th and 10th grade. Excuse me. So, I wanted to just share with you some of what they did that morning. For the entire 9th and 10th grade, we had an assembly with a speaker from an organization called Generation SOS. SOS stands for Share Our Stories. It's an organization out of New York that partners with schools and brings in speakers. They're young people who have struggled with substance use, who come in and tell their stories, and they talk to our kids in a way that kids can relate to, and they share their stories in a very honest way. I think the speaker that we saw on that day was very impactful. The kids really connected with her, and it was really a nice opportunity for our students to return to an assembly. It was the first time we had a large assembly in person, and on a really important topic. So we were very grateful to have the opportunity to do that morning. In addition to that assembly, students were working in small groups in grade levels with their counselors on a variety of topics, including just a general introduction to Naviance, which is the system that we use for our guidance programming throughout high school, and I believe it's introduced at the middle school as well, right, Naviance?
Yes.
And just getting students up and running on Naviance, and then introducing them to some of the inventories that are there. So, for example, on that morning, students were able to complete a career interest inventory. They were able to take a survey, and the results told them kind of some general things about themselves and their interests and potential career paths they might think about. Our 10th grade students worked with counselors on an activity that our college and career counselor, Randy Green, has been working hard to develop, which was a mock college admissions panel. And students were essentially given the profiles of fake students, and they were asked to participate as an admissions panel and to evaluate those packets. And some of their comments were really very interesting in the way that they looked at those profiles. And they made the connections to, okay, this is something that I need to think about for myself, and setting goals in terms of what they would like to have on their resume and how they can get involved in the community. So that was a really nice introduction to that kind of goal setting and thinking without making it a very high stakes college process. And lastly, I'll mention a big topic at Weston High School lately among our faculty has been academic integrity. You know, I think with remote learning and some of the changes that we've experienced over the last 2 years, we've all grown to be dependent on our devices in lots of ways, and our students have as well. And that has brought us to a place where we're seeing a great deal of reliance on those devices, sometimes in the best of ways and sometimes not. So we used that morning as an opportunity for students to work in small groups with academic teachers to have a really honest conversation about academic integrity and what that means, and what some of the implications of dishonesty in this realm are for them in high school and beyond, in college and even in life in general. So those were some really interesting conversations. There was some pushback from kids, which was great, and our teachers handled that really well. But again, you know, it might seem like it's only peripherally related to this notion of social emotional learning skills, but again, it's about helping students understand a mindset and thinking about their goals as they move forward, and shaping what they think of themselves and their dispositions. So we can do this in lots of ways, and conversation I think is another one of those data points, right? Going back to that survey, we have these responses, and that's the quantitative data. But the face-to-face conversations and those opportunities to see them in small groups, a lot of times tells us more than sometimes a survey might. So that was a really wonderful morning for us in terms of this kind of programming. We were lucky to be able to do those things.
The next bullet item is screenagers. The Weston High School PTO is sponsoring an event next Wednesday, April 27th at 7 o'clock in the high school auditorium. This screening of the documentary Screenagers, the Next Chapter, follows up on a presentation that was given several years ago with the original documentary. And I thought I would just read the description from the PTO flyer. It says, high stress, anxiety, and depression are experienced by millions of young people. We follow physician and filmmaker Delaney Weston as she discovers solutions for improved adolescent well-being in the digital age. The screening will be followed by discussion and question and answer. They are asking for RSVPs, but there is no charge. So this is an opportunity for parents to learn more about some strategies to help students, help their teenagers, because it really is a different world out there with the devices, with the apps, with social media. And it's something that we see quite a bit of in the middle school in particular, as students are often learning to navigate for the first time social media and how to really avoid some of the pitfalls of social media and its negative use. So I'm hoping that we have a good turnout from at least the middle school parents for a very timely topic that will hopefully help all of our students.
And similarly, we have an opportunity for parents coming up just in under 2 weeks now on May 4th. We are, for the second time, pleased to host a Rising Freshman Forum. So all 8th graders are asked to attend with a parent. The idea here is that we are speaking to students and their parents together. There is a focus for this forum on substance use, so it's timely, having seen these results and knowing that usage of certain substances is up in 7th and 8th grade. It's a prime opportunity to talk to students about these things with their parents present and to approach the conversation from a variety of perspectives. So we want to present to them some of the social aspects, some of the neurological aspects, some of the biological aspects of substance use. So we have a variety of speakers who are on tap to present that evening. And we are very pleased to bring this back for the second time. It was done for the first time in 2019 in partnership with the Weston Coalition. We're partnering this year with ADAP. So again, a thanks to Sonia Stack and her efforts in helping us to bring this program back. And we are looking forward to the discussion that evening.
Thank you. So that's kind of an overview of some of the social and emotional learning support that we have been doing for both our children, young adolescents, as well as the adults, both in the school and in the community. The next slide, please, just talks about the inclusive climate, and that's really the other goal. Like, we want an inclusive climate. We want a climate that honors the uniqueness. I think it's such a beautiful way that the board put it, honoring the uniqueness of every individual, and there's been a variety of things that, we have been doing this. This isn't anything new, but I think that it bears highlighting.
Okay, PBIS is another acronym. It stands for Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. It is an evidence-based tiered framework to proactively prevent unwanted behaviors, and it has universal supports that are school-wide. And also supports our positive school climate. The best example is summed up in our school motto, be safe, be kind, and be responsible. Our students work together to earn honeycombs for our honey hive by showing safe, kind, and responsible behavior. And really the hallmark of the program is that we teach those behaviors through our monthly assemblies, and we pick an area of focus. We've had many examples
1 month during Bus Safety Month, we might teach students what it looks like and sounds like to be safe on the bus. We have them role play, and then we celebrate those successes. Our bus drivers love to give us honeycombs in the morning for safe rides into school. Another example that we implemented several years ago actually was morning greetings, which is a great life skill. We noticed that in the morning some students would naturally say good morning, make eye contact, but we really wanted to explicitly teach that. So we built an assembly around it, and we modeled with students and practiced with them why and how, when you make eye contact and you greet somebody, what you might say, and we practiced it, and it dramatically increased the morning climate in the building. So, now the students come in and everybody says good morning and makes eye contact, and, it really starts conversations and has very positively impacted our school climate. Students love coming in and being greeted, and sometimes if somebody's not really feeling that excited to be coming in, it really turns their day around.
So at intermediate school, obviously building a positive and safe school climate is essential for helping students feel like they belong, feeling like we have building community, both grade level, classroom level, and school-wide. So that we do that in a lot of different ways as well. Our motto is pride. So it's personal accountability, respect, integrity, discipline, and effort. And our mascot is a wolf. So we have the paws. So we teach what that looks like, all those different attributes in the cafeteria, on the bus, in the classrooms, in the hallways, and we do that through monthly assemblies, as well as in the classrooms. And then we look out for those behaviors. And when we spot a class that's demonstrating one of those behaviors, they get a paw. And the paw goes into the wolf den, which is up at the front of the school. And we have celebrations after we have to collect so many paws. And that could be a school-wide drop everything and dance. Or we'll do a drop everything and play a game, or we'll do school spirit wear, or a lot of, just a way to have fun at our school. And we, our morning announcements are reported every week, so they're every morning, and they are displayed while the paws are given acknowledgement at our morning announcements. Also, additionally, each year we pick some theme that we like to focus on, in addition to pride. And this year we really are focusing on kindness. And so we talked about what that looks like. And we did a winter kindness challenge. And we asked all of our students to do an act of kindness and to record it on either a snowflake or onto a snowman, little snowman. And we built a snow wall in our main hallway, illustrating how much kindness we have. And then in March, we invited Brian Williams, who's the author of Kindness Ninja, to our school for an assembly. It was really very positive, high-spirited assembly. And he really celebrated all the kindness we've done, and also talked about the importance of kindness and what a difference it can make in someone's life. And we gave a lot of examples of how to do that. Right now we're working on kindness butterflies. So we're in spring, we took down the wall of snow. Not that it's helping the weather, but we'll continue to focus on kindness for the rest of this year. And it really is making a difference. Our students, they seem to be, now that, I think especially since masks are off, and they're really learning to build their social skills, and we're seeing a difference in really that positive community in our school.
At the middle school, our PBIS program is focused on the acronym SOAR, Safety, Ownership, Attitude, Respect. We also have a similar program to encourage the behaviors that underpin those values. Students can earn SOAR cards. A teacher will give students a SOAR card for exhibiting any of those positive attributes. And each month we have a drawing for a gift certificate for each grade level. We have an advisory program at the middle school, so once or twice a month, students will meet in a small advisory group of about 12 students to one faculty member. And sometimes we deal with school-wide SOAR type advisories, such as the annual Our Words Matter pledge. several years ago, students came up with this pledge because they wanted to make sure that we were valuing all students, the diversity of all of our students. And middle school is a time when language can start to become divisive and put downs can start to be heard. So we wanted to make sure that we all understood that this was a school climate where we weren't going to say words that were put downs or slurs or focused on anything that was divisive or negative, so that we could celebrate the uniqueness of all of the members of our community. Other advisory classes are actually planned and led by one of our student groups, the Wingman program. It's a student leadership program, and those students will work with a group of students on team building activities or a variety of other activities that really get the students interacting with each other and reflecting on what it is they experienced while they were doing specific activities. I think that's over to you, Julie.
Okay, we also have an advisory program at the high school, and similar to the structure at the middle school, it's approximately 12 students to one staff member. And it works in such a way that students are paired with that staff member and in that small group for all 4 years at the high school. So again, it's an opportunity for students to make connections outside of the academic classroom, as well as with an adult who may not be a teacher that they would have in an academic classroom. So fostering those connections between students and teachers. And similar to the middle school as well, advisory programming can differ depending on the time of year and depending on kind of what we're seeing. So, in the past we've done advisory lessons that are DBT based. We've done some mindfulness practice. We've also, earlier this year with ninth graders, we did a stress management advisory lesson. Much of our advisory this year has been focused on introducing and working on the portrait of the graduate. So as you all are well aware, our students are embarking on this process, and rolling that out to students is a time-consuming process, and we're using advisory as that vehicle. But ultimately, when our students do present their electronic portfolios, it will be to members of their advisory group and to that advisor that they've been with for all 4 years. So it should really be a culminating experience through the use of that, leveraging that advisory group. Tomorrow, we have an advisory that's planned, and many of our students will be engaged in Earth Day activities. So, advisory can fulfill a lot of roles, but I think primarily the goal, again, is to group students together outside of the typical groupings that they might be in for academic reasons, with a trusted adult and to build a relationship over time. I have the next bullet point. So American Tapestry is a new course this year at the high school. I think it's representative of a larger effort on our part to continually reflect on our program of studies and to offer new courses that could be impactful or of potential interest to students. American Tapestry.
Sorry, just to interrupt, was that one well subscribed this year?
American Tapestry?
Yeah.
I wish there were more students in it. I wish there were more. But for the first year, certainly it's a healthy group. They're meeting now. It is a one-semester course. It did not meet in the fall. They just began at the end of January. And the course is really focused on examining the concept of identity throughout recent history in the United States. So they look really primarily at the last 50 years. And they're particularly focused on ethnic and racial identity, although they do get into some gender issues as well. But it's illustrative, I think, of efforts curricularly to get at this inclusive climate piece. So what we've talked about so far as some of these examples are things that we're doing really outside of the traditional academic classroom, and this particular course, along with others that we offer, Facing History has been a long-standing offering at the high school that also looks at the way identity shapes, decisions we've made in our past. So this is an example of how we are really trying to get at creating an inclusive climate climate and promoting inclusivity through academic curriculum. And it's me again, Captain Circle. So many of you, I think, know that Mark Berkowitz, our athletic director, runs a Captain's Circle. The captains meet routinely with Mark, and they're very focused on developing leadership skills, developing a sense of sportsmanship and what it means to be a team, to be inclusive of all members of a team. They just met earlier this week, and sort of one of the problems of practice that came up in that meeting was the track captains, because track is such a big team, were really, I think, struggling a little bit with how to bring everyone together and how to make them truly feel like part of one thing. So the group really brainstormed, and they were doing some troubleshooting to try and come up with ways to make everyone feel like part of the whole. And that's a big focus of these discussions every time they meet. So it's a really wonderful thing that our students do, and it just raises the level of what it means to be a captain. Certainly they're a leader on their own individual team, but they're part of this captain's group that really just augments the whole experience.
Thank you, colleagues, for elaborating and giving us some great examples of the efforts that we've been engaged in an inclusive climate. And of course, the last one is the co-curricular program, which is in partnership with the town, between WOW and the youth sports, athletics, clubs, theater. All of that speaks, I think, to the community and the desire for the community to provide that kind of inclusive, welcoming environment for our youngsters. So next steps, what are we going to do next year? What are key things that we have to leverage? Dr. Craw did speak to the curriculum renewal cycle in health. Year 5 is the evaluation cycle, which is really good timing to be able to undergo that process. And with the developmental guidance, it's year 1, which is the beginning of K-12 developmental guidance effort. So I think that those really dovetail well into some of the challenges that we're seeing and provide us with opportunities and studying very carefully our curriculum and how we can strengthen it to make it more robust. I specifically think, for example, of some of the things that you were talking about, David, and you look at the drug and alcohol awareness and things like that, and to evaluate that through the lens also of the data and where perhaps we can strengthen that effort. I wrote student forums and programs. I only mentioned the middle school and high school. I didn't mean to slight the elementary schools. I think I was thinking more about the programs that we have been talking about, the evening programs, the programs in the assemblies during the day that we're finally getting back to, and also the parent forums. One of the things that we spoke about was the aspiring freshman forum. And given the data and what we have learned about middle school, it would be very appropriate for us to look to do a similar presentation, not waiting until 8th graders are transitioning to high school, but look at those middle school years and sort of look into how to provide a developmentally appropriate student-parent forum for that. And those discussions have already begun at the secondary level with Mr. Doak, Mr. Walters, and the high school administration. We have been working on the SRBI handbook. Dr. Craw has, I think, did you share the components of it yet, or it's in its final stages?
It's in its final stage of being developed, but that will be finalized shortly for the reading and math piece.
Yeah, we have reading and math. The social emotional piece, learning component, is an important part of that handbook. And we will be focusing on that next year to make sure that it is, a robust component of the handbook. This year, I think you are aware that it's been a year of transition, and we have been in the trenches, I guess I would say, with the PBS staff, the social workers, the counselors, the psychologists working with our children nonstop, and it's a good and appropriate step for next year to really focus on kind of documenting that piece. Community partnerships, I also think, part of the, with the aftermath of COVID, we have missed working and partnering with ADAP, for example. That was kind of put more on the wayside when we were in hybrid. We need to revitalize that partnership with Weston Youth Services. I mean, we talk and work with Allison Lisbon. I talk to her at least a couple of times a week. How can we leverage that partnership again now that we are back and we're in person? And also looking at the different town programs to be able to support them with Parks and Recs. And finally, how can we, I talk about enhanced co-curricular connections. And I think that also speaks to, the different data points that we look at. And with our it's not about adding more co-curriculars, it's about looking at what we offer and how we can interweave more of the social emotional learning piece and the idea of inclusivity into those activities. I have to say, I am so proud of our students, K-12. When I look, this year, and it's been a joy to see what goes on, especially at the elementary schools, because I've been in the secondary school mindset for so long. But when we look at things like, the ideal of inclusivity, and again, going back to those two things, you have care for others, care for self and care for others. One of the highlights of my spring was, I went with the kindergartners on a field trip. And that field trip was, they each brought an item to the food pantry. And it was just the sweetest, most heartwarming thing to see these little children look, and they really know my name now. Look, Mrs. Wolak, our superintendent, I brought my macaroni and cheese. And they go up and they place it on the shelf, and the woman was so explaining to them, and I think of that, and I think a portrait of a graduate, K-12, and what we are accomplishing in this district, and also taking our lead from the kindness of children. Now I know why they are so good at greeting me, Laura, for sharing that, because they are little children. Good morning, it makes a difference, and I'm very proud of the work that we have accomplished, especially this year under some trying circumstances, and I'm excited about the next steps. And then just real quickly, I'm going to put in a plug for the budget. There were certain things in the budget that we, again, appreciate your support in when we look at that return on investment, and all of these things are part of the budget that specifically speak to those two areas. Thank you.
Great, thank you for that presentation. I think that was really in-depth and helpful. We'll take some questions from the board if anybody has any. None? Okay, the other question I had was just how are we going to communicate the survey results to the parent community?
Well, this information is obviously public. It's going to be made available through Board Book, but also on our website. Additionally, at our freshman forum, I know the messaging will be threaded within that program, so we definitely have developed that plan. So I think that in conjunction with tonight's meeting has provided a lot of information.
I will also be referencing it. Our district update will be going out at the end of April, and all of the schools speak to different things, and my superintendent's update, I will also reference the links and the information that is on Board Book, so that parents are aware that the information is out there, and to be able to see it. We also, it comes up at PTO meetings and things like that. So any opportunity we get to address it and to bring it in the forefront of the work that we're doing, I think is important. So we'll make sure that that gets out late next week.
Can I just add one thing about releasing the questions and answers, which I think was great. we had asked about that in November, so I think it's great. I think it would be really helpful, Ken, if there could be a cover letter sort of to the questions and the results, because there are things that tripped us up even again today, even coming out of curriculum where we saw this once, like fair and just, and Julie spoke about that. It means something completely different. So I think it would be really helpful before it goes in, I mean, it's in the public domain now, right? Anyone who looks at tonight's agenda had an opportunity to look at it, but before it gets published, I think a cover page or some sort of summary needs to go on that talks about some of the terms. We're also, context, and what the district's next steps are with the data, right? Because the biggest takeaway people are gonna have is, okay, now what? Things look good, things don't look good, it's, their perception is their reality. So I just think we need to make sure before it goes formally into the public, although it's there now, but before it's published, a cover page, just sort of saying where we're at, what the next steps are, and then defining some of the terms that, people might not understand.
We appreciate that.
I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, great point. Are we moving to the next agenda?
I think we are.
I wanted at this time to please allow the administration and principals and the assistant principal, building administration to 7 o'clock is very early.
Thank you very much.
That would be nice.
Anyone need the bag truck to the car?
I know, we're good.
Okay, Mr. Cross, you're up in the financial update. Great.
Okay, so for update as of for period 9, this is more of an update as of April 7th, just to get a better sense as to where we project to be through the end of the fiscal year. I know it's been a significant increase month over month. I kind of just wanted to kind of give some perspective in terms of why we have such a significant change. Just to highlight a few things. It's important when we look at our numbers to really remember that we started the year with COVID, and we operated for the majority of the year in a COVID mode. We're definitely not back to our full operating model as we would expect. So typically, what normally happens at about the third quarter is that we typically review all of our encumbrances and requisitions and stuff, and we'll make a lot of adjustments accordingly. When you look at on our financial report, we have several different columns. We have our hard encumbrances, we have our anticipated, which is a little bit more soft. But these are the items that we're sort of kind of holding. We do expect to spend, but it all really depends on how things are progressing through the year, which will determine whether or not we will spend those funds or not. So last month, for example, our anticipated column was approximately $2.3 million. For this month, it's approximately $761,000. So we pretty much chew things up, close a lot of encumbrances, and just, typically at the third quarter, you do have a better sense as to where you will end the year. So with all that said, where we are as of the April 8th is that we do anticipate having a surplus to the end of the fiscal year of $894,383,000. Keep in mind that from the surplus, we have to lay out approximately $140,000, which will be set aside in a non-lapsing account next year to cover the final payment for our EREP, which will leave a surplus of approximately $754,352. When we think about the surplus, we have a few things that can happen with the surplus. One, we can make a request to the town to open a non-lapsing account. We also can pre-purchase a few items, or if we do nothing at all, we might as well just revert to the general town's unassigned fund balance. This is pretty much where we are. At the next month meeting, we'll discuss a few items that we're considering to pre-purchase, and a few expenditures that we have in the district that was not a part of our budget process, but we have seen the need to address those items. So we will discuss that in the May's financial and operations meeting. So I'm pause here just for the general, if there are any questions.
Do you have any further data on the excess cost reimbursement or no further?
Right, we will not get the final numbers for that until May. So at the end of May, we will have that. So as it relates to the internal services fund is trending as planned or as projected. And just a reminder, the internal services fund is our self-funded insurance option for dental plans only. And that is the update unless there's any other questions.
Sorry, I'm forgetting this button. Let's have a motion for the financials.
Sorry, Dave. Move that the Weston Board of Education approve the March 2022 financial update.
Can I have a second? Thanks, Bernie. Any comments? Okay, all in favor? Great. Anyone opposed? Okay, so the motion passes.
Melissa, before you move on.
Yep.
Just want to give a quick update for next year's budget.
Okay.
So we recently, maybe hot off the presses, maybe 2 days ago, we did get the renewal and rate notices for health insurance from the state. So we did mention that we were at about 8%. The state is coming in at a rate for active employees of 10.5%, for retirees under 65 at 2.9%, and for those over 65 at 2.4%. What that would mean for us is that on a net basis, we would need approximately $132,000 in addition to what our current budget is. The current plan is we have 2 final steps in the budget. We have the ATBM and then we have the full referendum. We will more than likely, depending on how things go, make a request to the Board of Finance to set aside money in an unmatched account to cover this increase. It's also mindful to know that the current census, the budget was based on whatever current census is. The current census is one of the lowest that I've seen since I've been here. So there's also a possibility that we may need additional funds if we do see any additional increase in the census for next year.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure that'll be on the agenda for the, yes. Okay. Great. All right, next we have policy. Okay, this is my committee here. Right, we, at our last policy meeting, made some changes to the bullying prevention and intervention policy and related regulation. What we're doing, if you recall, is we are looking at all of our policies. We're starting with our most heavily utilized policies, the ones that are come into interaction with the community, the students, the staff the most, and we're looking at these policies with an eye to inclusivity language, making sure that some of these policies haven't been changed in many years. We just want to make sure that they're reflective of the goals of the district and that we're referring to individuals the way that they would like to be referred to and the way that comports with state and federal law. So these are I don't want to use the word non-substantive because they are in some sense substantive, but they are non-substantive as it relates to the topic of the policy. So you can see in this bullying prevention and intervention policy, we changed words like him, her, them, that sort of thing. So if you want to look through that, if you haven't already, this is up for our first read tonight, but the policy committee went through it pretty thoroughly, and these were the changes that we suggested. Again, we didn't change the substance of the policy as it relates to bullying and intervention. And we'll be doing probably one of these a month as we move through these, that way it's not a burden on the administration. or reach out to me at any point, and we can incorporate those before this goes to a second read next month, in which case, at that point, we would vote and approve the policy as amended. Okay, so I encourage anybody in the community or otherwise to reach out to me if you have any thoughts on this. Sure. And that's it from the policy perspective. So we'll move on to the district update from Lisa.
Thank you. So just wanted to give a quick update about the building tours. We did have the building tours on, forgot the date, April, 2 weekends ago. A couple of weekends ago on a Saturday. It was April 2nd, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of dates. On April 2nd, I want to thank the principals for being there. We began with a tour of the high school. The point of the tour was to invite the community into to the schools and to be able to see the facilities. People that no longer have children in the town, people that don't have children that went to the school, and new families, anyone could attend the tour. And there were about 30 people, roughly, give or take, is that right, Ms. Sakata, on each tour? The tours got larger as we, went through. We started at the high school at 8, and by the time that we got to Lowercase, there was quite a crowd going through the tours. The principals gave the tours. I kind of brought up the rear. Everyone was given a map, and there were a lot of questions from new families that were excited about coming into Weston, to people that hadn't been in the schools in many years. I thought that it was a resounding success, and I would suggest that we do it every year in the spring, to be able to give the community an opportunity to come in and see the buildings. To me, it's much more exciting when there are students in the buildings, but we know that a Saturday is a great time because for working people that want to come in, and they can certainly see the student work and get a feel for the buildings. So we did that also in response to the work on the Facilities Optimization Committee, where the community wanted to see the buildings. We had scheduled them in February, typical snow, and then another snow date, and so we were finally able to do that with, thank you, Dr. Kaplan, at the beginning of April. Next item, I can keep going, is the Weston High School principal search, and I have to ask Sheila Cooperman, who has stayed through this very long meeting, has a very long drive home tonight, but I thought it was important that she speak as our HR manager about the search, and I certainly thank all of her efforts in seeing this search through. Someone asked why we weren't using a consultant, and this was at a meeting I was at a PTO meeting, and I said, we did think about using a consultant, but after talking to Ms. Kavanaugh, this is clearly something that we can do ourselves, and so I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Wallach. So we have 28 very enthusiastic candidates. We have vetted all 28 candidates. Both Superintendent Wallach, Assistant Superintendent Crow, and myself looked through them. We've narrowed that down to 10. We have set up phone screens with each, and actually video screens, and the ability to use a Zoom and Google Meets has been nice. So video screened 5 this week. We will video screen 5 in 2 weeks, and then we have set up 4 interviews the week of the 11th and the week of the 11th and 12th. We're going to have 2 candidates set up. I think we have a really good pool of candidates. We had a great response to a lot of very appropriate candidates. So that's where we are. Questions?
And where we've advertised.
Oh, so we've advertised on our district website, we've advertised on CT Brief, so those are 2. We've advertised on NESDEC, which is a New England site, so it goes out, we partner with them to do the search. They emailed it out to anyone who was certified in the different states, so it's Connecticut, Massachusetts, it's national. We got residents from California, we have a video screen with someone from California for next week, and one with someone from Massachusetts, so we've outlined all the criteria. We also advertised on a site called
MEMVET, which is a minority recruitment site in education.
Just a quick question, and you may not be able to answer it if you can't, just, that's fine, absolutely fine. Are any of the candidates from, what's the percentage of candidates that are applying from, locally, and by that I mean within the sort of Connecticut area? And what's the, and I don't need hard numbers, but are there any internal candidates? We don't obviously need to know names or anything, but are there any candidates internally?
No.
Okay.
And the percentage of candidates from, I would say 85% of them are from the Connecticut area, certainly have to be Connecticut certified. So we do have quite a couple of candidates from California. One that said they wanted to come back, so we're going to talk to. And several from Massachusetts who are around the area.
Thank you.
I have one more question.
Sure.
I think I read at some point, or you maybe shared, Tony shared, that you narrowed down as to 1, 2, or 3 candidates, and then there's some committee that is a parent. Is that how it works?
Yeah, so the process for us is that we have vetted all of the resumes. We've gone through all of them, looked at different ones, we looked at them at different times. Each one of us is going to come at it from a different perspective, so we narrowed it down to those 10. The 3 of us then talked to, we've talked to 5 already. Very quick interviews, sort of what I call the elevator speech. Tell me a little bit about yourself, why you're interested in Weston. The next step, we'll invite hopefully 4 or 5, we have 2 already, back to meet with the committee. The committee is comprised, and I'd like to keep it confidential in this area, but it's comprised of a board member, parent, so someone who meets both, 2 central office administrators, 2 WTA members of the teachers organization, and then 2 members of the administrative team. Anyone else? Call me if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, the last thing on the agenda is if we have any committee reports. Does anybody want to make any reports from the committees? Not tonight, fair enough. Okay, the next scheduled meeting of the Board of Ed will be on May 16th, 2022 at 7 o'clock here in the middle school. And with that, we can have a motion to adjourn. Thank you. And a second? Thank you. Okay, meeting adjourned.
Special announcement, the boys won the lacrosse game.